And so I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that there's a lightness there, which is not something that I can use to describe the past 42 years of my life. Life has been really hard with a lot of ups and a lot of downs and a lot of everything. And I think I can say for the first time that the future is light and there's peace there.
Welcome to Sober Dad Crew, the podcast where we talk about all things sobriety, recovery, parenting, music, tattoos, work, and more. For more information, please visit soberdadcrew.com. All right, my guest this episode is Louise Barnett. She's the host of Unmasking Sobriety and Mental Health and the author of the forthcoming book, Unmasked, a Bipolar Memoir of Tainted Love. Her work is focused on shattering mental health and addiction stigmas, and I first learned of her by seeing a Father's Day post where she talked about her husband's adoption of her daughter, his stepdaughter. Louise, welcome to Sober Dad Crew.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I'm excited to be connected and excited to share a bit of my story today. So thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. You know, we don't just talk to dads. Like to talk to a lot of people with good stories, and you have a cool story. So we're going to get into it. So, how many kids do you have?
One and done, Stephen. So my daughter, Annabelle, she'll be 12 this August.
Yes, 12. So I have a 13-year-old daughter, and
yeah,
a lot going on. Love her. She is a firecracker, an incredible little athlete, and the teenage years they're like rocking and rolling.
Yeah, hormones are
my job was to get her up for school this year. That was a hard job. I didn't like that job. I love her, but I didn't like that job.
Yeah.
They want to sleep, the adolescents.
They do.
And 12 is really essentially like, adolescent.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this really we'll really start to dig into your story, but, did you always want to be a mom?
It's a loaded question.
That's our specialty.
Yeah, right. I think for sure there's a piece of me that has always chased this white picket fence life, right? Where you have the husband and the dog and the house and the two children. That has been something that I've always chased to a fault my life. So I think there's a piece of me that has. When I got pregnant with Annabelle, it was very intentional, but in the midst of like pure mania. So just obviously using at the time, but also my mind quite literally. And I should probably disclose I am diagnosed bipolar 1. At the time I was got pregnant, I was not diagnosed. So it was kind of unknown to me, unknown to the world. And I very intentionally went out into the world wanting a baby and found somebody who would give me one, essentially.
It made sense at the time.
Yep. It made sense in my mind, in my brain. Yeah, I wasn't ready, not even close, but my brain thought I was.
Yeah. And let's dip into that a little bit, because I think an important part of what you do in your mission is talking about that intersect of mental health and addiction. And there's a huge range. Like, you're bipolar 1. I really struggled with depression and anxiety. I've had many guests who are like, you don't find a lot of people with addiction problems that don't have some kind of underlying trauma, mental health, whatever it is. So, let's dip into your story, whatever way you're comfortable.
Yeah, it is kind of that question of the chicken or the egg, right? I think for a lot of people, personally, and of course, all of these views are just my own personal views. So I'm not speaking, from a platform of any mental health expert, but I personally do believe that if we can understand our mental health challenges, and for many of us, for most of us, that's like once we've already kind of gone through some real struggle. But But if we can work through and understand some of that trauma, then we can be successful with our addictions. And I'm sure there's so many listeners that are going to be like, absolutely not. Right. And that's great. I want us to be having these conversations because everybody's different. For me, it wasn't until I did the work and worked through, I was diagnosed in 2015, bipolar. So arguably that was a long time ago. I got sober in 2021. So what happened from 2015 to 2021? I was in denial. I didn't take my meds. I didn't want anything to do with acceptance. And finally, in 2021, I started saying, okay, I'm going to look at my life holistically. It isn't just my drinking. It isn't just my drug use. It isn't just my mental health. It's everything together. And I really tackled everything from a personal development standpoint. Like, how can I just make my life better? How can I just seek happiness, right? And peace. And it was in that process, I had a more gradual journey to sobriety. It was not like an overnight thing. I probably spent a good maybe 12 months kind of trying, so to speak. And it's because I'm still in the work right now, but it's because I did enough of the work to accept my bipolar as part of who I am. I have a very strong viewpoint on this difference between I have bipolar or I am bipolar. And this could apply to depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, any kind of the gamut of it. And the reason I stand by this belief that I am bipolar is because it's intrinsically part of who I am. And if I say I have bipolar, that might suggest that I could get rid of it one day. That might suggest that it's like the flu or a cold and we can take a pill and we can get rid of it. And for me, the way that I've been able to find peace and acceptance is through that acknowledgement and really acceptance of the bipolar. And it was when I was able to find that peace and acceptance that then the alcohol piece really could stick.
Right. Because it's really an issue of wiring. You can't rewire your brain. You can train it and you can take things to help it, but there's no going in there and de-bipolaring or really de-depressioning, right? All these things that are, we can be helped by medicine 100%. And, and side note, whether you're in addiction or not, so many of the mental health medicines that work so well don't work so great. Like if you're drinking,
Right.
you're really kind of hindering the power of things that can make your life better.
Yep, absolutely. And consistency, right? If, when I was in active addiction, even if I was taking my meds, it certainly wasn't every day. And it wasn't as prescribed. That's for sure. And I like what you said, we can't rewire because in some ways we can rewire behaviors, we can rewire our nervous system. But I think that's such a powerful question to ask ourselves, what are the things that are just part of me? What are the things that I just need to accept?
I can't remember where I heard this, but somebody talked about things being gravity problems, right? You can't change gravity, right? You can change a lot of things, but gravity just is. Though there might be some people out there right now who, think that gravity is not real because a lot of people think a lot of stuff's not real. But, gravity just is. So you can't change gravity, but you can work on changing how you exist in that field. And I talk about it at work, the owners are gravity, right? Maybe the company would sell, but really that's not something that's going to change. So if you're at work and you don't like the owner, okay, you're not going to change that. So then either you're going to adjust the way you interact in that space or you're going to choose to exist in a different space. And I found that really a valuable tool for me. And also I had to along the way, when I was divorced, my older kid's mom, I really had to fight against this grass is always greener kind of thing. And that was like part of my work is like, oh, right, the grass actually isn't always greener. That's just my brain of anxiety and depression and drinking too much trying to convince me. Like, I don't have to change myself. I just need to go over there.
Yeah.
Or move or like do this different. And you can spend your whole life just like chasing the greener grass.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Like knowing the difference between what you can and cannot change um, is a really, I think, hard thing to understand sometimes, especially when we let relationships. And when I say the word relationship, I'm also speaking about our relationship to alcohol, to things, to, yes, people, of course, too. Um, but when we've trained our brain enough and told ourselves a story for such a long time, we believe that certain things can't change, or we believe that we are, you know, powerless or powerful to a substance. And so, how do we know? How do we tease that apart to really know, like, where is our power?
Yeah. And it takes a lot of work. Like, I did a lot of therapy. I'm actually like starting up with a new therapist soon, which is cool because like I got a lot going on. Like, my mom's at, end state dementia. And that's like this really hard intersect I've been sitting with this week. Like, my 18-year-old's, graduating from high school today. My mom doesn't really know who we are. And I know she would have been like so proud of her. It's like this, my brain is sort of like going, it's hard to sit in both of those places. But, the sober me will sit there, and feel it and work through it and talk to my wife about it and like understand that sometimes you have to be in that hard place. It's just where you are, but it's not forever.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, and I'm sorry to hear about your mom's journey right now. I'm also in that phase of life where our parents are getting older, and my dad suffers with Parkinson's, and he's actually in the hospital right now. But 2 weeks ago, he was admitted to the hospital, and it was the reason I'm mentioning this is I don't really get a lot of cravings anymore. I've been sober for 4 years. It was such a decision in my life that I felt so good about that, like, cravings are just not part of my day to day. And I'm very grateful for that. But when I found out my dad was in the hospital and he lives across the ocean, he lives in Africa, it was the first time that I had this overwhelming urge to make it all disappear. And the way I used to make it all disappear was to get blackout drunk, right? And so I think it was such a strong reminder to me that, like, we are on this journey forever. Right?
Yeah.
Like, we're never safe, so to speak. And it was like, it was such an icky feeling. And I dealt with it by talking about it. I told my husband, and just worked through it. But yeah, these times in our lives, like end of life for parents and things that our kids are going through, really, really test us.
Yeah. And over the years, because I'm, 15 plus years sober, I realized the hard times and the good times are sort of what I have the greatest gratitude for sobriety, because you're present in both. Let's swing back for a minute. So you decided, in bipolar mode, let's have a baby. Like, can you dig into that a little bit?
Yeah. So I grew up in the Northeast. So I grew up in Massachusetts and Rhode Island.
I'm a Maine native, so
Okay.
yeah, that's where my folks still are. So
Nice.
I feel better about my distance to my parents because your dad lives in
Yeah,
Africa, so I
either
drive there in
way.
8 hours.
It's
So
cool. But I had just I won't kind of walk through the previous relationship, but I was in a long-term relationship with a man, and he had gone through cancer experience in Boston. And once he got through that and was in remission, we had the opportunity to move to Annapolis, Maryland, just kind of for a fresh start. Um, I'm going to use alias names just for the purpose of this story. These are the same alias names that are in my book, so they'll match up.
all good.
But Jim was the name of him. And Jim and I had about a 6-year relationship that was 100% focused on drugs, alcohol. That's it, for the time being. So he got cancer, went through cancer. We moved to Annapolis, Maryland, and then he started up all of his old habits.
He gets a reboot.
He gets a
I
reboot, yeah,
didn't
but
die, so let's roll.
yeah, exactly. So instead of, one side of the coin would be like second chance at life, he kind of went back to his old ways. And I was at a point 6 years into this relationship where I had a clear mind at the time and wanted to focus on my future. I had actually gotten an MBA. I had done a lot of really good things in the past, actually, while he was in treatment. So I got a job at a restaurant, sort of marketing and catering sales job, and started eyeing. It was like my office was upstairs, the top of the stairs, and at the bottom of the stairs were all the servers, and they would all have this like camaraderie. They were all in their early 20s. I was pushing 30 at the time, and I kind of laid eyes on this young guy, Luke. And we kind of did this flirtatious dance for a few weeks. And eventually the flirtatious dance, ended up in, a first date and a first kiss and a first, et cetera, et cetera. And so I met him in August. And by middle of September, we wanted to move in together. I wanted to get married. I wanted to have a baby. So like literally this is textbook mania. In a matter of these like 6 short weeks, I kind of completely imploded my life in one sense, but I was still riding the high. So got rid of Jim, said, bye, Jim. I'm in love. I'm getting married to this new guy. Jim goes away. And Luke, who is a really gentle soul and a very nice person, I kind of describe him as, the man who gave me everything I wanted, because I quite literally said I want a baby, and he gave me a baby. So I met him in August. I was pregnant December 21st, is when I found out I was pregnant. And about 2 days later, I woke up on a mattress on the floor of our completely empty apartment. We had moved in together, but had like nothing because nobody had any money. And I quite literally woke up 2 days later and I looked around, and this world that had for so many weeks been rainbows and glitter and unicorns and sunshine, I woke up in a dark, gray, musty, disgusting world. And I had no idea what happened. I was terrified. It was very much like, what the F have I just done? I looked at this man, Luke, and didn't recognize him. Like, he was not attractive anymore. He was like a completely different person. And so I kind of went on for a couple weeks in a textbook depression, like barely making it through each day, crying all the time. I tend to lose weight when I'm depressed, actually, and when I'm manic. And then I kind of made it through the holidays. And then after the new year, I just told him, I said, I can't do this. He said, what do you mean you can't do this? I said, I can't do this. He goes, with the baby? I said, no, I'm having the baby. I can't do this. I can't do you and me. And he early 20s kind of chose a more volatile reaction to that, and kind of grabbed all his stuff, threw it in his truck, and, as the story goes, watched the dust kind of settle as he drove away. And there I was, by my own choice, by my own doing, by my own decision, single and pregnant.
So then there you are in the apartment. What's next?
Beautiful thing about pregnancy for me was that I did find some equilibrium. Because obviously there's so many hormones happening in pregnancy. So for a lot of women, that actually will send them into mania or will send them into depression. For me, I was really fortunate, and I just kind of found peace. So I got through my pregnancy. I had sort of through these manias, you tend to burn a lot of bridges and a lot of relationships. And so I had completely burned my relationship with my family. They weren't speaking to me. My mother finally started speaking to me during my third trimester. So she was there for the birth of Annabelle. And the first 8 months of being a mom, I relished in it. I got a new job, a better job that paid more. I found a new apartment that I could afford. I was getting kicked out of the old apartment. Again, like these are just things that happen when you're making these choices. I was going, for walks in the park. I managed to make a couple, girlfriends that, we were forming close relationships with. And then my company, I was in the hotel world now at this point, which is where I spent most of my career. They flew me to Houston for a training. And I went out to this training and I could already feel just getting on the plane, just a hint of that sparkle coming back. And the first day of the conference, you can guess it, I met a boy. I met a man, and this turned into a 4-day whirlwind cyclone. This man was incredibly charismatic, charming, knew how to say and do all the right things. He shared with me at the time that he had his own history, some, I guess we'll just say there's a felony record on his card, but my brain just, again, this is where I said earlier, like I chased picket fences for so many relationships of my life, and I put blinders on when I didn't want to see certain things and then chased the illusion. And so that's what I did with his alias is Patrick. Came back to came back to Annapolis. And so that was April, May, June, July. So 3 months later, I drove my 8-month child 1,400 miles in the car with Patrick to Dallas to start a new life.
Sounds like a weird country song.
My family has now stopped talking to me again. I'm completely on my own again, chasing this Emerald City. And we get to Dallas, and I think it's probably obvious, but of course I'm giving the cliff notes here, but within about 2 months, Patrick was arrested again for major drunk driving, kids in the car, like just a whole kind of series of events took place in the first 2 months I was in Dallas. Some kind of domestic disputes. We had cops to the house, I think at least 3 times. It was just, for all intents and purposes, chaos. Annabelle, who today is probably the healthiest child I know, was getting sick all the time as an early baby. So while she might not remember any of this, she was certainly impacted by all of it. And eventually, after the third cop visit, the next morning, I had to leave. This was a safety, had to leave. I called my mom, said, please, you have to help me. Please, please, please. I don't know what I've done. You have to help me. And she said, I'm sorry, Louise. I'm sure there's a women's shelter that you could take Annabelle to. I can't help you anymore. And unpacking that is a conversation for another time, but meant I had to help myself. I had to get myself out. And so it was really leaving Patrick the first time. He resurfaces again, but that my drinking kind of went from the place of, I was always the party girl. I was always taking it to the next level. But when I left Patrick, my drinking took on a new animal, and it took on a much darker place, more of the secrecy, more of kind of the alone drinking, blacking out almost every night, kind of at home sort of thing. I was devastated. As much as it's interesting, love is interesting, and our brains are interesting, and relationships are complex. And it was at the time, as much as he was a dark, dangerous man, there was a part of me that just like wanted to be there. And I had to separate myself enough to kind of see clearly uh, after that. Um, so Patrick went away for a little while, but then he came back when he got out of prison. He came back, and for a brief period of time, I was already diagnosed bipolar at this point, but not taking meds, drinking too much, et cetera, not acknowledging my bipolar. And so for a very brief period of time, I kind of let myself get swept up in Patrick. And then same as I did with Luke, kind of had a moment of clarity and said, I can't do this anymore. You have to go. And he didn't go quietly. The new apartment that I had lived in with Annabelle when we left Patrick the first time, he managed to get in and ransack and take every belonging inside, and just like this whole, fuck you departure. So that sent me into another depression. And I think it's interesting with depression and bipolar, we won't get too much into it, but this isn't just our brain like working on a clock, like, oh, it's March, so we're going to get manic. It's December, so we're going to get depressed. So that's part of it. There is some circadian data to support that, but our cycles are very much triggered by events, by stress, by exciting things, by getting a new job, by getting money. And so for me, these devastating events, which I put myself in, I'm taking full responsibility here, would send me just spiraling down. And each spiral for me was deeper and deeper. So again, I'm kind of in this really dark place after the final departure of Patrick. And I I high functioned my way out of it. I was still growing my career. I was still in the hotel space. I was still top performer, but behind the scenes was a really, really dark place for probably about 2 years. Um, I think. And I don't know, Stephen, we can pause here. Obviously, my current husband's coming to this scene pretty soon. But tell me if you want to pause or jump in or.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of sets the stage of the chaos stage maybe a little bit. So I'm imagining at some point you started taking the meds, and that leveled you out, and then as you indicated later, you got sober. But let's talk about how you met your husband.
Yeah. So yeah, I started going to therapy. I started telling my therapist the truth. I think I'd always been going to therapy. It was the telling the truth part that.
Yeah, my wife's a therapist, so
Okay.
yeah,
So
right.
she
Like,
gets
but it
that.
is true. As someone who's done a lot of therapy, I used to bullshit around, and my therapist be like, "Stop,
Yeah.
stop it, stop it, stop it. You're joking around. Like you gotta take it serious,
Yeah.
or like, what's the point?"
Exactly. So, and I guess I should mention when I left Patrick the first time, that's when I went to an inpatient psychiatric hospital unit, stayed there for a little while, got diagnosed, et cetera. So that's the timeline of that. Um, so yeah, I started finding some stability. I've always been somebody that's very futuristic. My career has always been really important to me. At the time, I was working for the Hyatt brand hotels, and I won like the top performer, award, and they sent a batch of us on a trip to Paris. And we could bring a guest to Paris, and I could have found somebody on Tinder, or I could have, reached out to my mom. We were talking again. She could have come with me, but I decided to bring Annabelle. And so she was 3 or 4 at the time. And this trip was really, really pivotal. This trip, I've been chasing love my whole life. And this trip taught me what love was in the city of love. And it was beautiful. And it wasn't a big grand gesture. It was eating macaroons, on the sidewalk. It was, watching her dance with the clowns outside the Louvre. It was all these tiny micro things that created love. And I kind of promised myself in Paris that when we got back, I would make some changes. Prior to Paris, it was minimum 1 to 2 bottles a night after Annabelle went to bed, that kind of thing. And I promised myself I would be more present for her. Until Paris, Annabelle was a burden. I resented being a mother. It was like she was getting in my way. And these are awful things to say. But I'm saying them because they're real and they're how I felt. And I felt those things because obviously I was not in a good place myself. And Paris shifted that for me. So when we got back from Paris, I traded in a night out with the girls to color unicorns with my daughter. Like these small kind of shifts started happening. And the 3rd of July of 2018, I had plans to go to this big festival in Dallas, just outside of Dallas. Big festival of fireworks, kind of the whole 4th of July thing. And I ended up not having a date. I thought I was going to find someone, and that day came and I didn't have a date. I had a sitter, and I just said to myself, you know what, Louise, like, go for it. Just get yourself out there, have a solo date for yourself. Just go. You deserve a fun night out. So I did. I Ubered my way out to Kaboom Town. I watched some live music. I had I think 1 margarita, really trying to just moderate. This is when my moderation kicks in, and pace myself. And I had fun. And then eventually it was Dallas, 100 million degrees, and I was sweating. And so I decided to just pop into this restaurant. And I popped in. The air conditioning felt amazing. I sat down at the bar. I asked the bartender for a glass of Prosecco. I went to the bathroom to kind of freshen up, fix my lipstick, powder my nose, what have you. And then I sat back down at the bar, and I'm just literally on my phone, mindlessly scrolling through strangers' lives. And I was just what am I doing here? This is so pathetic. What am I doing here? I kind of I turned over to my right shoulder, and I saw somebody coming from the back hallway, and he was this I don't know, David Beckham circa 2015. He was this very kind of rugged, sexy leather jacket type, scruffy beard type guy. And I looked to my left, and there's a woman 3 seats down from me. And I'm like, oh yeah, he's obviously going to see her. And he walks closer, and he sits down next to me. And I was just like, what? What is happening right now? And he didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. And then I kind of, did one of these look back and forth at each other. And he just said, hello. And he said it in a British accent. And my heart melted. But my heart melted into calm. My heart didn't race. My gut wasn't pounding. My chest wasn't breaking through my heart. He was just a man, and I was just a woman, and I felt calm and I felt safe. And so this was new. I still very much had this excitement about meeting somebody new. That was all still there, but it just felt a small shift different. And we ended up just kind of talking and having a good night. We ended up kissing under the 4th of July, fireworks. And that's how I met Paul. And from there, Paul has always been somebody who, if he's all in, he's all in. And so he knew from that night, sitting down at the bar, that I had a 4-year-old daughter, that she was my world. And while it might seem funny to have this conversation on a first, not even date, on a first encounter, it was very clear that if I was to meet somebody, we'd have to all be in this together, kind of thing. So we waited a couple months for him to meet her, but he was all in with me from the very beginning. And when he finally met her, it was we were at this restaurant with an outdoor grassy area where the kids can run and play. And I'm sitting with him, and Annabelle comes up and she's like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "Oh, hi." He's so nervous. He's like, "Oh, hi, I'm Paul." And she looks at me like I'm supposed to give the approval. And I just kind of nodded. And she goes, and like ran away.
Yeah, it's like having met, you know, kids that aren't biologically mine. That is like an intense, and it's always good to wait. Like we waited, and I just remembered it was on my, now wife's birthday, and it was like meeting them, and it was like, I had two kids. Like I, you know, feel like I knew what I was doing, but it is very different when they're like not biologically yours, because, no matter how great my relationship with their mom, like this piece almost has to work more.
Yeah.
Right. Because we always said like the kids are first.
Yeah.
That's the priority. This can't disrupt.
Always. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that, you meet and it grows, but at a certain point, and I don't remember the order, you guys get married and he adopts her. I think that's the right order. And so, how did that adoption work? Because she does have a biological father who obviously has had no part. Like, did he have to surrender rights?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The chapters with Luke are obviously a little bit more complicated, right, than we chatted about. But yeah, he's had no contact with her. Annabelle knows who he is. She knows his real name. She knows he lives on the East Coast, all these things. She knows that if she ever wants to reach out, then that's okay. So yeah, Luke and I really didn't keep in touch. I would say maybe once, I don't know, every 12 months, 18 months, like I would just kind of check in. But there didn't seem really any desire on his part to stay connected. And so in 2021, we just, our family had now been together since 2018. Paul and I got married in 2019, and we just felt like we wanted not just to be a family, but for Paul, who's in this father role, he's taking on every responsibility, moral, ethical, financial, like any decision that's needs to be made. Like he's filling all of these roles, and he loves her like she's his own. And so it almost felt like a disservice for him not to have that father title officially. Right. And so I reached out to Luke, and we were able to have some cordial conversation, which was really nice. And I've actually since had quite a bit of contact with Luke just in the past 6 months. And, he believes that this is the best thing he could have ever done for Annabelle, was to release those rights, because he wasn't fulfilling those duties. And so to give this gift of like a quote unquote real father, I want to be careful using those terms, but for our story, it kind of fits. It was really a gift. It's very rare for an adoption to take place when the biological father is alive and not incarcerated. um, and it did make a big difference for our family. We celebrate March 3rd is the day that the adoption went through, and we celebrate that like it's a holiday every year. And it has given, we still have a lot of chapters ahead. I'm sure she's already started to show interest. So, there'll be a day where we kind of make that connection, et cetera. But when that day happens, she's going to be coming at it with a really solid foundation and relationship with her dad, which is Paul.
Yeah. I mean, there's such beauty in the way, like this moment in your story, and I always say like to my kids, like the journey matters, right? You can't subtract any piece of any of this, even though it was like hard, but you can get to, like my wife and I always say, we have this beautiful life, right? You can get to a beautiful life. And I think that's like such an important piece of like recovery and sobriety, and one thing I believe is that like dad is a title that is earned. It is not given.
I love that.
There's certainly, legally speaking, medical and all, there's like reasons for Paul, like to be able to take her to the doctor, right? Just like really practical stuff. But like the emotional side of it, like the words mom and dad, like you got to earn those every day in my mind, so like how much we're like a really open family. So we talk about everything. And our joke is if you bring it up, you got to explain it, which can get a little awkward because I try and be funny sometimes. And I'm always explaining things I shouldn't explain. But like, what have your conversations with your daughter been about your story? Because obviously there's medical implications, right? Like mental health things can journey through families. And at each age, there's more depth at different ages, but I imagine you've had some dinner table conversations around some of these things.
Yeah. And the past 18 months of my life has been writing this book. So it's definitely front and center. Annabelle has incredible emotional awareness, and she herself, she was just diagnosed with ADHD 2 years ago and has had already some bouts of depression and everything like that. So she's lived experience already as an almost 12-year-old. Comes with a really beautiful sense of empathy and understanding. I try to be as open and honest as possible with discretion. I would say where I hold back is mostly probably from a place of shame, if I'm being honest. Like it's when I look back at certain chapters of my life, she knows I'm sober. She knows my sober date. We celebrate it. She knows I used to drink too much and now I don't drink at all, right? But I think where I hold back is more of like, I guess, the dirty details. And then we didn't really get into it today, but like before I met Luke, there was a lot of really questionable behavior with like pretty intense drug use and sexuality and things like that. And so that's a piece of my story that I haven't told. Um, that being said, I want her to know everything when it's age appropriate, I suppose.
Right.
When the book gets published, I don't know if anybody knows anything about the publishing world, but it's not fast.
No, I used to work in publishing. It is slow. She'll
It's
probably
very
be 30 when it's published, so she'll be plenty mature.
exactly. So that's my hope is that, when this thing lands on shelves, it'll be appropriate for her to read it. My husband and I have had full transparency always, with everything. So, he's read the whole book. Doesn't like to read the whole book, but he's read it.
Yeah, but it's also the power of like real love, right? Like we can see these things and we can accept things that people have done. But, I imagine like early in your dating, there was some like, so I got a couple things maybe I should tell you.
Well, actually, good story about Paul. I didn't tell him I never told anybody I was bipolar. And I went through kind of a few months of self-sabotage with Paul, kind of this idea that like I was worried he was going to leave me because I'm crazy. So I'm just going to like act like a crazy person. Anyway, so I did a lot of self-sabotaging for a couple months, drinking way too much. And he sat me down one day and was like, I love you, but like certain things need to change. And like the drinking, we got to talk about the drinking. And it was this kind of big come to, Jesus moment. And it was in this really emotionally driven conversation that I told him I was bipolar. And it was like, I was sharing this news as though it was like coming out for the first time ever. And when I said it to him, I'm bipolar, he looked at me and he held my hand. We were sitting on a couch together. He held my hand and he goes, Louise, I already know. And it was like this moment of like, oh my God, he's accepted me this whole time. And here I thought this big secret was gonna, scare him off or whatever. And it was like, he really does love me for That was a really special moment for us.
Yeah, and it's funny that people know, but that is incredible. And my wife always says clear as kind. Not always easy to be on either side of that equation, right? Not easy for him to tell you like, "Hey, I love you, but this drinking is gonna like blow it all up."
Yep.
And then you having to disclose and thinking it's gonna fall apart, but it doesn't. And yeah, it's a good story. So, what's next for you guys?
It's funny, I was just in therapy yesterday. And I wrote 3 things that I was grateful for. And the first was my past. And that kind of brought this like punch to the gut feeling. So I think there's still a lot there that I'm working through. The present, I felt it in my chest, almost in the way that we're like excited or like anxious for what's to come. And then the third thing I said was my future. And where I felt this in my body, I didn't feel it in my body. I felt it as like a halo radiating out of my head. And so I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that there's a lightness there, which is not something that I can use to describe the past 42 years of my life. Life has been really hard with a lot of ups and a lot of downs and a lot of everything. And I think I can say for the first time that the future is light. And there's peace there. I've had the most stability since I got sober. Since I got sober, my bipolar got stable. There's no coincidence there. So I was still cycling even when I was sober until about 18 months ago. And when you cycle, when you're medicated and managed, it's actually kind of awesome because you like become this super productive person or like, it's kind of manageable cycling. But I added a new med 18 months ago. And since then I've been like, sometimes I wake up and think life is boring because I'm just like, is it really real that I'm just kind of coasting? Like, is that even a possibility for me? I didn't know it was. And so we've moved to Colorado. We're going to be in this house for 6 years. Just to have this stability is something I've never experienced. And I'm loving it, every second of it.
I think that's an awesome place to wrap up for sure. Thank you so much for, your willingness to tell your story.
You're welcome. It is not always easy to tell your story, and there's no right beginning, end, or middle, but I love the work that you're doing. I'm so glad. I don't usually get to talk about kind of the fatherhood side of things. And I live in a really unique relationship with my husband where he really gave his whole heart from day one. And because he did that, Annabelle has, the father that she has today. So thank you for allowing me to share my story.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening. Sober Dad Crew is a DIY project by Stephen Kimball, who writes, edits, and produces the show. To support the show, please review it where you listen to podcasts or visit soberdadcrew.com to buy some merchandise or make a donation.